Hey, Jose, Kamani, and Leslie. Say video I'm preparing for you. Um, what we've been studying in to get this stuff ready now, of course, like always. We've been studying in reading class a little bit has been fables. We've talked about those a little bit. Not sure if you've heard of fables before, but it's a type of story, and they always involve a lesson, a moral. Let me show you something in Zoom here. Let me bring you to it. So you're talking about fables. Fables are a special type of story, and they're stories that have a moral, like a lesson about life, like or how you should behave. It has characters that are animals, but they have human traits. That's called personification. You know, they have animals that like have human type personalities. They might be kind, or they might be lazy, or they might be foolish or hardworking, you know, types of traits humans could have. And they talk like humans too. And then fables are stories that come from folklore, meaning stories that are passed down through generations in a culture. Like they started like someone told their kids about it, and then those kids grew up and told their kids. And so it's passed down that way. And then eventually someone decides to write them down. Example of a fable is the tortoise and the hare. You know, the hare is a rabbit and he thinks he can beat the tortoise, so he doesn't race his hardest. He stops and rests, and the tortoise ends up beating him, so he learns a lesson there. So we've been studying that in the parts of a fable. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to read to you a fable. And hopefully I'm going to read to you a fable. We'll see. I don't know if I need this or not. Let's see. I can actually bring up the book right here. This is a fable called The Crane and the Crab. And let's see what kind of human traits we can come up with here. All right, in these characters. Let's look for the lesson, the moral in this story too. This is called The Crane and the Crab. This is a fable that was famous in the Muslim Empire. So that, remember we were talking about the Muslim Empire, it's from that culture. Once upon a time there lived a cunning crane. As a young bird, he had enjoyed his life and hunting fish by the pond. But recently, life had seemed drab meaning like boring. Every day was the same, stalking the pool, looking for movements under the water, pouncing for his prey. It was hard work and frustrating. More often than not, he would come up empty-beaked. It took most of the day to catch enough fish, and then the next day he had to begin all over again. The crane wanted a new life, one where he could spend his days lazing under the shade of the trees without having to lift a feather. If you remember, the crane was a cunning crane, cunning meaning sneaky and clever. Instead of daydreaming about this new life, he instead hatched a plan. The crane began to cultivate an air of sadness. He would stand by his pond, his beak drooping downward, balancing on his one leg. Every so often he would heave a great sigh as if to say, "The world is a terrible place." One day a crab scuttled by and saw the crane, looking miserable as usual. "Why are you so sad?" asked the crab, who was a nice crab and always concerned about her fellow creatures. Now you see that personification, right? Human traits. "My dear, I have the worst news, and I don't know what to do about it," the crane said, shaking his head from side to side. "I heard two fishermen talking, not 20 feet from where we are standing. They plan to drain the pond. These humans are so greedy. They don't fish a little like I do. They want to take everything." "But this is terrible," said the crab. "What will my friends, the fishes, do? They will all die when the pond is drained." "They don't like you much. No offense, Mr. Crane, but at least you don't kill them all at once." "I know," answered the crane, "but I fear that though I know a way out for the fishes, they will never trust me. I have eaten too many of them in the past. Alas, if only I had been a vegetarian crane." Excuse me. The crab sat and pondered a while, her claws waving gently. I think perhaps it was fated that I meet you, Mr. Crane. I can talk to the fishes and persuade them to listen to your plan. The crab was as good as her word. Within a very short amount of time, fish began to bob up to the surface of the pond, including the king of the fishes himself. The crane's beak began to water, but he forced himself to remain calm. The crab has told us the terrible news, said the king, but he mentioned you had a plan, Mr. Crane. Indeed I do, O king of the fishes, renowned for your wisdom and the care of your people, replied the crane. Higher up on those hills lies another, larger pond. It has few fishes, which is why I have always hunted here. As the crane mentioned hunting, some of the more timid fish began to dive back into the water in alarm, and it took a number of shouted commands from the king of the fishes to bring them back again. I could carry you to that pond, continued the crane, as if nothing had happened. That is, of course, if you would trust me. The fish didn't like that plan very much, but the king of the fishes was a good ruler and decided that it was worth the risk. I will go first, he declared. And if I do not return with the news of this pond, we will know the crane has tricked us. There's more personification. The king of the fish, he's like brave like a king. He's willing to risk himself. The fish are thinking he's not going to take us up. He's just going to eat us when he gets us in his beak. And the king of the fish is like, well, let me try it. If I don't come back, you'll know he ate me and not to trust him. So very brave of the kingfish. With that, the king of the fishes flung himself into the air, and the crane caught him neatly in his beak. Soaring up through the sky, the crane flew to the hills. Just as he said, a larger pond sat there, shaded by trees. The crane carefully deposited the king of the fishes into the pond and allowed him to swim for several minutes. Eventually, the king declared the new kingdom safe, and the crane carried him back to his subjects below. The fish rejoiced. They had been saved, and the crane had proved trustworthy. The next two fish hopped into the crane's beak to be carried off to the new pond, or so they thought. For the crane had been waiting for this moment all along. He was, if you will remember, a cunning crane. There had never been two fishermen or a plan to drain the pond. Instead of carrying the new fish to the pond in the hills, he took them to a rock. As they flopped on the rock surface, gasping, he ate them both in one big gulp. This, thought the crane, was the perfect plan. The fishes will think I'm helping them, and they'll never know the difference. I can eat every fish in the pond, and they will jump into my beak. The crane wasn't really hungry after those two fish, but he was so smug about the success of his cunning plan that he wanted to see more poor fish tricked. Meanwhile, the crab had been watching these proceedings with interest. She had, after all, brought the king of the fishes and the crane together. She decided to see the new pond for herself. After all, the fisherman would also destroy her home, and secretly the crab had always wanted to fly. So on his next trip, the crane obliged. He had never eaten crab and thought it might be quite tasty. As he coasted toward the rock, though, the crab saw the bones of the fish bleaching in the sun. With horror, she realized what the crane had done. How could you? Exclaimed the crab. You monster! Monster? Scoffed the crane. I'm a crane. Eating fish is what I do. This was merely a more efficient method. I experiment with new ideas all the time. For example, I think I may experiment now by eating crab, madam. But the crab was too quick. She normally didn't approve of violence, but her life was at risk, not to mention the other fish waiting for their trip. She reached out with her claws and gripped the crane's neck, feeling the pincers. The crane was suddenly very afraid. He was too scared even to gulp. You will carry me back to the pond, Mr. Crane, the crab said in a soft, menacing voice, and then you will fly away very, very fast. You will find another place to live, and if I ever hear of you playing such a trick again, you will find out just how sharp these claws are. The crane, feeling less cunning by the minute, did as the crab said. As soon as the crab was deposited on the ground, he flew away as fast as his wings would carry him. Meanwhile, the crab scuttled back to the old pond and told the fish the sad news of their departed comrades. They mourned for many days and vowed never to trust a bird again. Okay, so that is the story of the crab and the crane. And remember, in a fable like this, the animals are characters and they have personification, so you could see it and where all the characters, they talk like humans, and some are kind like some humans are, like the crab. Some are sneaky and evil like the crane. Some are brave like the king of the fish. So that's normal feature of a fable, animals with human traits, personification. And then there's a moral here, a lesson to be learned. And I'm thinking the lesson here is that if you try to be sneaky or lazy and not want to work for what you get, then you'll lose in the end. Because the crane, he tried to be sneaky, and get away with his plan by tricking the fish, but he ended up getting kicked out by the crab. She told him to leave and never come back. So he doesn't get to follow through with his plan. He doesn't get to eat fish the easy way. So his plan didn't work out. So like the lesson learned here is trying to trick people and be lazy and not work for things ends up not working out in the end usually. Also, maybe another lesson is to not trust someone. And if like the fish trusted the bird, and maybe they learned a lesson there. Be careful who you trust. They might be trying to trick you, so that could be a lesson here too. So I'm gonna start another video where we'll have a further discussion about this and some activities that we're gonna do, but I'm gonna stop this video for now before it gets too long, and then I'm gonna put up another video for you to watch regarding some of the activities that we're going to do. So all right, we'll see you in a little bit.